You're listening to the Elvis Ultimate Fan Channel podcast, the channel that is devoted 100% to the life and career of the biggest selling recording artist of all time, with your host, Steve Francis.
Yes, indeed. Welcome to another episode from Elvis the Ultimate Fan Channel podcast. Today's subject is Mr. Marty Lacker, a member of Elvis's famed Memphis Mafia and his best man at Elvis's 1967 wedding to Priscilla. He went to school with Elvis, and that's how they met. Now, I'm delighted to say I have on the line his daughter, Sheri Lacker. Hi, Sheri.
How are you doing, Steve? Good morning, or good afternoon, should I say, for you.
It's a pleasure talking to you.
It's my pleasure, believe me.
And tell me, what's the weather like in Memphis this morning?
It's rather chilly. We just had a very unusual situation. We had a bit of snow yesterday on the ground. It started the evening previous, and we had enormous amounts of rain, but we got blessed with a few snowflakes. So it's chilly. I actually saw that on the Graceland cam on live stream. I look at that every now and then, and yeah. you can see the flakes in front of the mansion. Yeah, it was the kind that it's the best kind. It didn't stick to the roads or cause many, traffic problems. It's on the roofs and the ugly wood piles and that kind of thing. So a bit of decoration is how we put it. So
yeah. Well, we've got quite a big storm rolling in here at the moment in Ireland by the name of Kira. So I've got my fingers crossed that we don't lose power and lose the interview.
Yeah, I hope not as well. I hope you all stay safe and it'll blow through without any damage.
I have no plans about going out anyway. I always say just unless it's an absolute necessary, don't go out in it.
Yeah, well, flying shrapnel and tree limbs and such can put a dent in your day. You know what I mean?
A dent in anything. A dent in your head.
In your head, yeah. You'll have a new good ornament.
Okay, so can you just, for the listeners, tell me a little bit about yourself and your mom and your dad and, of course, Elvis?
Okay, how we all came to be, as it were?
Yeah.
Okay. How it all started was my dad, Marty Lacker, was born in Brooklyn, the Bronx, and it was getting kind of rough territory up there in the times that he was growing up in the 50s. And so about, I think it was 1952, about the age of 15, his parents brought him down to Memphis. And the reason they chose Memphis is because his sister had married and already come to Memphis. And so that they felt that was a good place to start. And so he ended up in Memphis at the age of 15, first went to Central High School, and he had a bit of a New York attitude, I'll put, and so did his father. So he ended up being, shall we say, transferred to Humes High School.
And that was, of course, as everybody knows, that's where Elvis was.
Exactly. I think he may have been a senior when my dad was a sophomore. Well, here they have 4 high school years. And so that would have been the second year of high school for my dad, the 4th year and final year for Elvis. Thereabouts. I'm not quite sure on that, but it's close enough. And anyway, so my father dressed, kind of wild. He wore the pistol pocket pants and the flipped up collars, and his hair was long and in a style sort of like Elvis wore, but they didn't know each other at that time. It was the style of the more hip kids. Most people down here were, wearing buzz cuts and close cropped hair and very straight laced looking. And so they both.
So kind of, sorry to cut you off there, but Marty and Elvis kind of stood out together.
Exactly.
Because that's what everybody always says about Elvis is he stood out, at Humes.
Right. Yeah. And so they just they didn't really, run up to each other and say, hey, dude, you dress like me. It was one of those situations where the other kids would say, hey, you going to outdo Presley today? Or Elvis would, nod his head, or Daddy would nod his head in the hall. They just they knew of each other because of their style.
Yeah.
And So, and they both had football, a love of football in common, and he would see Elvis at the football games, etc. So they knew of each other, and they kind of went the same circles. And then, probably not a well-known fact, my father was also a fan of African American church, the gospel music.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. So, and then there was a place called East Trigg Baptist Church over here that he and a friend had gone to one night when they were in high school. And lo and behold, Elvis was there too. And as we all know, it's a well-known fact that Elvis did gravitate toward, that type of music. And he would go to the Ellis Auditorium and various church and listen to the artist and the choir singing. So they would see each other in that capacity as well too. Well, to make a long story short, my dad went into the Army in 1954. That's about the same time that Elvis had his first radio play. And I believe it was That's All Right, Mama. But yeah.
That's right. Yeah, That's All Right, Mama. Yeah.
Yeah. And, Daddy did get to hear that on the radio before he went into the Army, so it was like when he heard it was Elvis singing that, he and his buddy kind of looked at each other and like, wow, who would ever thought, the library worker from Humes would have, catapulted to that status. But he went to the Army, as I said, in 1954. He was in there about 3 years. So when he came home, it was about 1957, 58, somewhere right in there. And as you know, Elvis ended up going to the Army in 1960, I believe, didn't he? Or was it?
He was drafted in March 1958.
58, right. So their Army careers kind of, crisscrossed. So I think it was right before Elvis went into the Army that they actually reacquainted, and he and George Klein went up to the house. And
yeah, I actually have a note here that says that Marty started going up to Graceland in 1957. So just about just a little under a year before Elvis drafted in March.
Right. Thank you for clarifying that, because I'm not good at all of these dates, but I try my best. It's hard.
Oh yeah, no.
Yeah,
okay.
To keep them all in your head. And so it was in that vicinity. Yeah. And so he joined in on the festivities, like, you read about the fairgrounds, the skating, the, up at Graceland, hanging out. So they did get to know each other and become friends at that point. And then, of course,
I remember Marty saying he was quite impressed that Elvis remembered him when he first went up with George.
Yes, I heard him talk about that too. And he had asked, how he remembered him. He said, I just remember in school he was, kind of tooling around on his own by himself. And, he dressed a lot like I did. And so I did notice him. And yeah, Daddy was impressed, with that. Also, I had forgotten too that previous to their meeting and Daddy going into, I believe it was before he went into the service. You may have to correct me here on the timeline as well.
Okay.
I know that Daddy had gone into a training program for a store here in Memphis. It was a department store called Shaneberg's, and it was over at that Lamar shopping center, and there was a Cat's drugstore just behind. It was like a little shopping center in the 50s, and that's where Elvis held that first flatbed concert, in the parking lot of the Cat's drugstore. And my dad was managing or learning to manage a store, so they had seen each other before that too. That was before, I guess that was right after Daddy came back from the Army. And then before he and George went up. So, that was another kind of, it was almost like their paths crossed so many times it was meant to be or something.
Yes,
But,
it was fate.
Yeah.
And when did your father meet Patsy, who was to become his wife?
Okay, that was in the interim while Elvis was in the Army. While my dad was in the Army, he had started being a radio operator, and he decided that he wanted to go into radio. So he went to Knoxville to take a class in radio broadcasting. My mom lived in Knoxville, grew up there, and they met while he was in Knoxville. After he took the class and all, he worked for a local radio station. He became a disc jockey on one of the evening programs on the radio, and he also ran a little record shop, and their paths crossed, and that's where they met. And they lived over where, I don't know if you know about American football or not, but they lived over where the Tennessee Vols, University of Tennessee, the track is now. So they tore down the apartments they lived in. But anyway, that's how they met. And then I was born in 1960. And so Daddy continued to be on the disc jockey route. You know, disc jockeys move around quite a lot in America. And so we ended up in Memphis, and he went to work for WHBQ, and that's where, you know, he reacquainted with George Klein, and they worked together there. And so when Elvis came back from the Army, that's how he ended up going back up. And then Mama had her first encounter with Elvis at that point. And the funny thing about it is you hear about all these teenage girls that would, you know, watch Ed Sullivan. Mama said she wasn't nuts and pulling her hair and all that stuff. She said, but they snuck out of church when Elvis made the appearance on Ed Sullivan's show. She and her friend had snuck out of church early so they could go watch Elvis. And so I once posed the question. I said, did you ever in your wildest dreams compare sitting there watching him on TV and then now look back and think that you ended up being, you know, one of his closest friends in the circle? She said, it boggles the mind. She said, I just, you know, I can't even wrap my mind around it or express, you know, to explain
it must have been unreal for her when she, you know, she finally gained that access to Elvis personally. You know, it must have been like a dream for her.
It was. I mean, my mom was never the kind, like I say, that was one of those hair pulling, you know, fans that, you know, just, oh God, I'm giddy, I'm going to Elvis. She just, you know, she knew he was a big star and everything. And she said when she drove up the driveway, she said, you know, because they came from a blue collar, you know, mill family. And so when she saw that, she said she just, you know, kind of clammed up and got quiet. You know, her eyes were bigger than everything else at that point. And so anyway, I asked her about that first evening. You know, I had a chance to talk to her before she passed about it. And she said that first night that, you know, she saw Anita Wood and, you know, a lot of the guys that were there early on. And she said there was just a bunch of people, you know, sitting around in the living room talking like normal people, you know. And she said she saw Elvis come down and she said, my goodness, he is pretty. So,
now, a lot of people say that even without seeing him walk in, you just knew that he'd walked in the room. Because he carried such a presence with him. Yeah. If that makes sense, you know, like I say, without even seeing him walking in the room, you knew he was walking in the room.
Yeah, it is kind of like that. I don't know if it was a situation where, you know, people would say, oh, you know, there's Elvis, or the whole dynamic of the room would change. But he did. I mean, he filled up a room when he came in. You know, I can't describe it either. It's like it was something special. It wasn't, you know, to the point where it was like, you know, holy presence or anything like that.
Yeah.
It was just, you know, it was just he had a vibe about him that was just, you know, bigger than life.
Yeah. I've also heard people say as well that the movies and still photographs don't do his looks justice. Now, if that's the case, he must have been devastatingly handsome.
I've been asked that too, and he was beautiful. He was in person. He was more. Maybe it's because you could see the real person and his personality enhanced it, but he was a gorgeous man. And if I do dare say, in person, he was even more pretty than he was on the picture.
Well, I mean, not very often could you call a man beautiful looking, but it does apply to Elvis without a doubt.
Yeah, I mean,
and that comes from a straight male. I mean, I'm a straight male, and I can see that he was beautiful.
You can't imagine how many straight men have, stood there with their mouths open like, damn, he looks good. Excuse my language. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
Yeah.
I remember a story as well. We'll touch on it later. The 1969 Memphis Sessions. One of the musicians, the first night that Elvis walked into the recording session, he said he was more beautiful than some women I've seen.
Yes, that was the absolute truth, and I will attest to that. And in that particular period of time, the 68, 69, probably up to 72, Elvis was in his prime, and he had grown into his looks, and he was a beautiful man. He was.
I would most definitely agree with your time frame there. From 1968 to 72, he was just like, my gosh.
Yeah.
Look at that beautiful human being.
I know it. And you know how they say, people grow into their looks or they hit their prime. I believe that's what happened, both physically and musically. That was his sweet spot.
Did he ever allude himself to his looks? Did he ever know just how beautiful he was?
Oh, he did. And I will be using swear words.
Oh, no.
Because if I quote him, you could often hear people talk or hear people say, he'd be looking in the mirror and he'd go, damn, I'm a good looking son of a bitch. Like that. I mean, I don't know if you want to use that or not, but that's almost a direct quote from what I understand.
Yeah, we can use that. that.
I forget I'm talking Ireland, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So 1960, Elvis is back with a bang, and he starts making movies.
Right.
And is that, if I remember rightly, not long after Elvis started making movies again, your father Marty went on the payroll in probably October, November of 1961, when they were making Kid Galahad.
Exactly. Yes, that is true. He had, at that point, where we were talking earlier about him being a disc jockey, and he went up to visit, and Elvis asked him to, come along with him, and he said, well, I got to talk to my wife, I have a daughter, and so he talked to Mama. Mama said, yeah, if you want to try it, and so he did, and, that's the beginning of it on the payroll. But, it went way beyond after he left the payroll, too. But that was his beginning to be in the inner circle, so to speak, or the Memphis Mafia. Although they had not been coined yet. So. No,
it was a year or two after that, I think, when they were in Vegas.
Yeah,
and
62. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the limousine pulled up outside one of the hotels with the Aladdin or the Riviera, and they all got out, and they were all wearing mohair suits and dark glasses, and somebody shouted, hey, is that the Mafia? And it kind of stuck. That's the Memphis Mafia.
Yeah, it was a reporter. They had gone over to, I think Dad had said that they were filming one of the movies and had taken a break. And there was two instances that they all went over. One was on a birthday, January 8th, Elvis's birthday, to see the opening of Johnny Ray's, the singer, American singer Johnny Ray, had opened his show over there. And they had gone on his birthday in 62, I believe. And, but, there was a couple of times they went there, and you're right, there was a reporter, supposedly for the Las Vegas Sun, who had shouted that out. Yeah, it's like, look, Elvis is here, and he brought the Mafia with him from Memphis, and they kind of, coined that phrase from then on. It just stuck.
I think the boys enjoyed the notoriety of it all.
I imagine they did at some point. I'm sure it certainly got them in places they wouldn't have ordinarily been able to get into. So,
yeah.
And it afforded them, my dad would have been the first to admit, he said that part of his life, he would have never have been able to be in some of the places that he was. I mean, he was a disc jockey, so musically he would have met, a lot of famous people over the years, but nothing on the capacity that he did with Elvis.
Now we know with hindsight that the movies became a chore for Elvis after the mid 60s, probably from about 1964, after Viva Las Vegas, and the next one was Kissing Cousins. The quality went down quite sharply. But probably speaking to your father, it was a lot of fun. Those years were a lot of fun, no doubt.
Yeah, they, not necessarily the filming part of it, but when they, the boredom part of it, and then they would have to be creative to alleviate the boredom in between the shot setups and stuff, and on the road, they would have a blast. They would drive out in the motorhome, or they would play practical jokes on each other on the sets in between shots. And, I think that probably may be when their sense of camaraderie may have forged even tighter. Now, I've never heard anybody say that, but just as, observing over the years and now looking back to see what other people have said that were in the group, I think that's what did build that sense of having each other's backs.
I've seen some of the home movies that were shot. There's a few that are actually shot when they were driving cross country in Elvis's tour bus. They were kind of play fighting, and then there's another one as well where they're actually in the middle of the desert. So that's obviously another time when they were traveling either to or from a movie. They seemed to be having a great time. They were, play fighting, and Elvis was doing his karate stances and all those sort of things.
Yes, I know that one well because I have one of my favorite pictures that I made a photograph from that video. Whosever it was, I had still shot. It's my dad and Billy Smith and Elvis, and they're all laughing, and Billy's got his dukes up like he's ready for Elvis, so that's one of my favorite shots there on the side of the road in the desert. It
must have taken them a few days to go from California to Memphis every time they made a movie. I'm not too sure of the timeline, but it must be 3 or 4 days would it take driving?
Yes, I've done it a couple of times, not in the mobile home, but we've gone back and forth a couple of times. And if you do a regular 8-hour day of driving, 8 to 10 hours, it takes about 4 days, 3.5 days. Now, sometimes, depending on Elvis's mood, they might drive 3 hours and stop at a hotel. It may take them even longer. Or if they needed to get home or whatever, you could drive straight, 48 hours and get back. But a normal trip is about 4 days.
Now, I just want to touch on something which can be quite emotive to some people. This is probably the time when the pep pills and so forth probably took hold more. Not so much took hold. I don't mean that, but they become more commonplace because of the pressure they were under to get to the movies and do the movies and so forth. Would you like to say anything about that?
Well, I would say it certainly lent itself to a necessary use of it if they had to do something. I'm not sure that in and of itself would have been the only catalyst. I think that, say for instance, they go film during the day and they're there a full day. And then if they decide to go to Vegas and see a show, and then they're up all night seeing a show, and then they got to get back, for filming, I'm sure that takes something to sleep, takes something to get up, that probably did, set that in motion for higher use. And plus you have to remember, we were almost into what I would call the hippie days, the bohemian days of you know, drug use and experimentation. So it was also a cultural thing, you know, that people were using.
Now, I just want to stress, obviously, at the time as well, there was nothing illegal in this because they were all prescribed.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
And in the 50s and 60s, the dangers weren't known either of amphetamine use. They were regularly given. They were given to Elvis in the army as well in 1958, 1960 to stay awake.
Right. Yes.
So
exactly.
This was commonplace.
Right, and the stigma, as you say, was not there of street drugs and that kind of thing. I mean, it was not street drugs because even if you look back in the history, and I'm sure in UK as well, but in America, it was like they even referred to Valium as mother's little helper. You know, I stress that most housewives during that time, if they had a nerve problem, their, you know, doctor would, you know, hand them a prescription for Valium, which was commonplace.
Yes.
So you have to take in the culture as well, you know, in the time.
Yeah. So I just wanted to touch on that. Now, you were born in 1960. So right. What would have been your first memories of Elvis?
Oh my goodness. Well, it's probably climbing up and down in his lap. Of the situation, my first memories are, I can remember being on a football field. I didn't know it was a football field. I just thought we were outside playing. And I have this mental snapshot of all these very tall people around me. And I kept running after a football. Well, what that ended up being is my mom and dad had me at the, you know, how they used to play touch football over at Graceland School, around the corner from Graceland. And and so I kept trying to run after the ball. And so my mom had to pick me up and hold me. And strangely enough, that's my first memory. And supposedly that is very much backed up by what, you know, Billy Smith's wife, Jo Smith, who's like, you know, they're my second parents almost. She said that's the first time she ever met me. I was, you know, like still a toddler. And she said, yeah, your mama had to keep you from running out on the field and getting trampled because you kept wanting to play. So, yeah, that's my first memory. And then my first, you know, of Elvis being in it, I used to have these plastic bongos that I'd carry around with me, or always had little musical instruments. I don't know if it was his influence or you know, familial influence, but I would have some little instrument in my hand, and I would climb up in his lap and climb back down and climb back up in his lap. And Mom always told me, he said, look, little baby, he said, if you want to sit in my lap, you can sit in my lap. He said, but if you're going to run up and down, you're going to have to get down. So, you know, he loved kids and babies, but he couldn't stand the up and down business. So.
I'm sure a lot of our female listeners are quivering now thinking about sitting in Elvis's lap.
Yeah, I've had some people approach me after I've said some things like that and was like, oh my God, you know. So, yeah, it's, in hindsight, it is kind of wild to think of, you know, that lifetime. So
now, while Marty was working for Elvis, you lived in Graceland?
During part of it, yes. Yeah, my sister Angie was born in 1965, and on her birth certificate, she's actually the only other person that has that address on her birth certificate other than Lisa Marie. But we were living there from the end of 1963, I believe, right at the beginning of 1964, not long after my brother had been born. And
that's Mark.
Yes,
yeah?
Mark. Yeah, it's me, then Mark, and then my sister Angie. And so it was me and Mark. And so 60, like I say, end of 1963, probably till maybe early to mid 1965. My sister was born in February, so it was after that. So probably mid 1965.
You would have seen quite a bit of Priscilla while Elvis was away.
Oh yeah,
Like,
she basically, you know, well, she stayed out in her room. We lived in the part they call the annex now, which was the garage that was converted
yeah.
into a little room, and she would stay out there with us quite a lot. And if my memory serves me correctly, she came to live, I believe, 63, 62, 63. She came to live at Graceland. And so she would stay out there in the apartment with Mama because all the guys would be out of town, and other than the maids and Grandma, as people know her as Dodger,
Yes.
would be basically the only people in the house, and the secretaries out in the office, of course. So we all kind of hung out together there. And
Now, I think most people were told that Priscilla was actually staying with Dee and Vernon, Elvis's father, on Dolan. But I think most of the time she was in Graceland, wasn't she?
She lived at Graceland. She didn't live. If she ever lived with Vernon and Dee, it must have been right when she first got there, because no, that's a myth. She lived at Graceland.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Okay, and let's move now to the wedding, Elvis and Priscilla's wedding in May of 1967. Were you present at that wedding? I know, obviously, for people that don't know, Marty was joint best man along with Joey Esposito.
Yes, he was. No, I was not. At that point, I was only 7, and I believe, yeah, my younger siblings were, way too young. We were in. I can't remember if we were there. I know we went to Vegas in 67, but I don't think it was at the same time, because we stayed at the Aladdin Hotel, which they did get married at.
Yes.
But we stayed in the room because at that point, Las Vegas was not at all conducive to children. It was, adult playland back then. Yeah. And so, no, we, to my knowledge, we weren't even in Vegas at that point.
But if I remember rightly, Elvis and Priscilla threw another party at Graceland later on for the people that couldn't make it.
Yes, they did. And as a matter of fact, I believe that's the one that my mom attended.
Yeah.
But yeah, and a lot of people, as you know, probably, I'm sure, and your listeners probably know that that created quite a rift between some of the older guys that had been there for a long time.
Particularly Red.
Yes, very much so.
In fact, Red went away. He went away for a while, didn't he? He didn't come back until about 1969-70, I believe. Right.
He left the entire, organization completely. And I can't say that I blame him, some of the things now, I don't know how far you want to go with this, but some of the things that people have read in Priscilla's book are absolutely untrue.
Okay.
About the setup of the wedding and who was there and why certain people were there. But the major consensus is that basically Colonel Parker had set up certain parameters, and they had Daddy and Joe take care of a lot of the things that were to be set up and put in place. And that's probably as far as I'll go, because I don't want to step on anybody's toes or anything. But
yeah, well, it was always my understanding that Colonel Parker had a big say in who was there and who wasn't.
Yeah, it seemed as though it was a PR circus from, afar. So.
And shortly after the wedding, Marty ceased to be one of the Memphis Mafia, didn't he?
Let's see. Yes, I believe so. I believe his separation notice was 67 or 68. And to fill in the blanks, though, in that, I don't know if you want to kind of illuminate what, went on during that time, is that once he married Priscilla, he had just purchased, previous to that, the Circle G Ranch. And so everybody was involved in that too. And my dad did work down there, and Alan Fortis managed the ranch for him, one of the other Memphis Mafia, along with a couple
Yes.
other guys. And some of the guys and their wives had trailers, and we didn't actually have a trailer down there because Elvis had just bought some land where my dad had built our house, and it wasn't that far from the ranch. So that's why he would go down there to go to work every day. But we lived up in our house, and we were in school already because, we were the oldest children, me and Mark, and then Danny Smith, and then Angie, my sister, and then Joey Smith was kind of the ages of the children. So that's why Mama and Joe, if I sidestep here for a second, that's why Mama and Joe Smith became such good friends, because in the early days before Elvis married Priscilla, it was sort of like, as there's a book, by my mom and dad, Portrait of a Friend, there's a chapter in there where my mom starts, and it's called Wife Was a Four-Letter Word.
Yes. I was going to come to that book later on, but since you mentioned it,
Well, we can, go back to it. But anyway, that was just a side item I, wanted to tell you about. That's why they became so close, and we became so close. We're like family now, because people, the wives, and then especially if you had children in the early days, but once Priscilla and Elvis married and she had a child, things became a little more, shall we say, even keeled as far as who could do what.
Yes.
But I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you're okay. No, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. So as we say, 1967, even though Marty was no longer a member of the Memphis Mafia per se, he still continued his friendship with Elvis. He still continued to go to travel with him. He still continued to go to Graceland.
Yeah, and how that came about actually is once they sold the ranch, and this, keep in mind, this was after the last movie. It was kind of this convergence of change. And they had done the last movie, or right at the last movie, they did, I believe, Clambake, and then another one right at the time he bought Circle G. And then I guess Change of Habit was right after that, but he had sold the ranch in 68, 67, 68. And so there was no longer the ranch to work. And Elvis was no longer doing movies. And he had not yet done that 69 comeback special, or 68 comeback special, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that would have been in June of 1968. It was taped in June 1968, broadcast in December 1968.
Right. So there was this glitch of time where, Vernon was getting nervous. He was still spending money, but there was no, other than residual income, I'm sure. But, there was no active work going on. So they decided that they were going to lay some of the guys off. And my dad had already started making connections in the music world and had decided he was going to get into the Memphis music business. So when it came to that point, he said, look, some of these guys don't have anything to go to. He said, I'm getting ready to go, work for such and such. Let me go ahead and leave the payroll, and that'll be one less guy that has to lose his job. So he separated from them on the payroll, like you said, and he went on to start his music, Memphis music.
And that's when he linked up with Chips down in the Memphis American recording studio?
Well, that's when he became familiar with him. He first went to a company called Pepper Tanner. And had started out as a jingle company. And they ended up having their own record label and promoting artists. That's what Daddy's forte became, was what they call A&R. It's artist and repertoire and promotions. And I don't know if you know the American singer Rita Coolidge.
Oh, yes, I've heard of Rita, yeah.
Well, he actually discovered her. He's the first one that brought her in and had her recorded at Pepper Tanner. And so, that got him into the Memphis music scene big time, through all his connections. And he became, he started the first Grammy chapter in Memphis. He started the first Memphis Music Awards. So he, had stuff to go to where the other ones didn't. And in that interim, he did become acquainted with Chip's Moment, and then he did transfer over to work with Chips at American Studios.
And the story goes that in January of 1969, Marty was in Graceland one evening, and Elvis and Felton Jarvis, I believe,
yes.
If my memory serves me right, were talking about the up-and-coming recording sessions in Nashville. And Marty was shaking his head, and Elvis says, "What's wrong? What's wrong?" And he just said, "Well, I wish just once you'd try Chips." And Elvis said, "Well, maybe I will sometime." And then they said, "Come on, let's go and eat." And Marty says, "I'm not hungry." And then Felton comes out a couple of minutes later and says, "Elvis wants to talk to you." And that's when he asked Marty to set up the sessions with Chips instead of Nashville.
Exactly. That's exactly how it happened.
So, if we are grateful the way that Marty set that up, because we all know just how successful those sessions were. If it hadn't been for Marty, those sessions probably wouldn't have happened.
Well, I wouldn't think so. There were a couple of the other guys that claimed that they had, ends with Chips or whatever, but I don't think they would have ever been forceful enough to risk, making Elvis mad. And my dad had just, because he had spread his wings into the Memphis music business, he knew what he was talking about. He knew what it could be. And
he certainly did.
Yeah, I don't think some of the other ones would have ventured out. Now, other people in the past, a couple of the other guys, which I will not name, because everybody has families, took credit for that for a long time. But now finally, it has come to light that indeed Daddy was the one that was responsible for that.
Now, we all know what a great success those sessions were. In the Ghetto, Kentucky Range, Suspicious Minds, great big hits for Elvis.
Right. Any Day Now.
Yeah, Any Day Now, that's another great one. But there was rumors that Colonel Parker wasn't too happy with the way it was panning out, and he said to Tom Diskin, who was his right-hand man, you come away from there and you let Elvis fall on his ass.
Exactly.
So, and he did anything but fall on his ass. So that
Right.
just goes to show how Parker wasn't maybe the manager that everybody tries to say he was.
Yeah, and what's a shame about that is that could have been the perfect time for Elvis to start taking more reins of his own decision. However, I think Elvis deferred to his father a lot, and I believe his father was scared of everything going away in an instant. Should there be someone falling on their ass? And, or the repercussions, because, as we saw when he tried to do Stars Born or go to Europe, Parker, or I think he even tried to fire Parker one time, Elvis did. And
he did it in the mid-70s.
Right. And they went into a room, and when they came out, Elvis acquiesced to everything the man said. And I think because Parker's way of dealing, he could BS, you know what I'm saying? In other words, holding things. He knew how to get what he wanted done. And I think he had that hold over Elvis. And it's a shame, that was one missed opportunity there after American Studios recordings, because as an illustration, Daddy also got him to record at Stax on the one of the future albums.
Yes, that's right.
But he didn't get as good of music choices. So RCA or Diskin or Colonel or somebody, I would have to, look into who did that. But they had control of the song choices. And even though they were at, the legendary Stax Studios, he was still bridled by that nasty list of song choice. And so the sorry to cut you off there, but the standard of the songs in Stax in 1973 was nowhere near the standard that they were in '69. Right. And so it could have, it could have been, but it wasn't. And I think that just deflated Elvis's balloon, and he just went back to the, hey, let's follow the regular path here. This is what
I think it's fair to say that it was Parker was responsible for Elvis not returning to American. I believe he put something in Elvis's head about Chips that wasn't exactly true, and he only ever recorded one time in Chips' studio. That was January and February of '69, and that was it.
Exactly right. I agree with you, because I do recall something of that nature where, it was always about, well, whose name's bigger, or who's the boss, or that's the same excuse they used with Star Is Born. When Streisand wanted, to have Elvis do the Kris Kristofferson part. Colonel got into the, semantics of whose name's first and whose name's bigger and how much you get paid and, a percentage of this and that. So, unfortunately.
Very unfortunately. So on the back of those sessions, he was on the crest of a wave, and then he made his return to live performances in August of 1969.
Yeah, the comeback to the Vegas.
Yeah, the International. Yeah.
Yeah. That's when it all started. And again, if you look at him in those videos that exist from that particular those performances there on the first end, that is just amazing. I mean, for a man who hasn't, other than that one performance with the comeback special being taped, to get up in front of a live audience after that amount of time and put on that kind of show, that was just amazing.
I know it was nerve-wracking for Elvis, because Steve Binder, who did the '68 comeback special, there was Elvis actually said to Steve just before he was due to go on, "I can't go on."
Yeah, well, that's
he was
point blank. Yeah.
And Steve said, "I don't care what you're going to do. You're going to go out there, even if you just go out there and say hello and then come back out into the dressing room." But of course, we all know now that, I mean, you can actually see on some of the outtakes, his hands are actually shaking. He's that nervous.
Oh yeah.
So he didn't even realize if anybody was going to remember him.
Right. He had all those emotional misgivings and, the whole thing that anybody that quote unquote is going to make a comeback. But, he would get nervous before he'd go out just about every time. I mean, even the Aloha special, you can tell, when he stepped out on the stage that he was kind of okay, because he broke a lot of, barriers. He was the first to do a lot of things, and so he didn't really have anybody else's, lead to follow.
I remember him saying in the interview he conducted for Elvis on tour in 1972 that he never got over stage fright. He went through it every time. Yeah,
I don't doubt that, because you could look at him, even in person, you could kind of tell his, the way he would hold himself for the first. If you're familiar with how he moves and acts in person, and then, you could tell that his body language was a little different, for the first, and then he would relax into it.
So you would have seen Elvis live?
Yes, I finally did when, let's see, he came to Memphis. I can't remember if I saw him in Vegas first or if I saw him in Memphis first. I'm not good on the years on that. I went to Vegas in '72, and I know he came to Memphis in '75, but there was another one before that. I mean, '76. There was another one before that we had first seen him at.
There was a concert in '74 in Memphis, which they actually recorded and put out as an album. March 1974.
That may have been it. So I imagine it must have been Vegas where I saw him first. August of '72 or '73.
Yeah.
And it was amazing. I mean, I was to the point, I think it was '72. because I was 12, no, 13. I don't know. But anyway, I'm going to sit here and argue with myself for 15 minutes.
But the main thing is you saw him live.
I did every night for a week. And since I must have been 13 because I got to go to the midnight show. And it just thrilled the stuffing out of me because, I had never seen that before. And I'm like, my gracious,
Yeah.
That's not the guy I know at home, or at the house or whatever, and because we would still go up there even after, we left from living there in 65. We would go when they were in town. We would go up weekly. I mean, 3-4 times a week when they were in town. Yeah. So it was like going to your uncle's house or, just it was just a family, But
it's interesting what you say there about, this isn't the same guy that I know. When you saw him on stage, this isn't the same. And I'm reminded of the press conference he gave prior to appearing in Madison Square Garden. And he says it's very hard to live up to an image. The image is one thing and a human being is another. Exactly. That's always struck me. So obviously there was 2 Elvises.
There was. He always had that. I don't want to use the. And there was a style about him that he had this vibe, but when he was in front of people, it was notched up. But when he was on stage, it was like, wow, it was like turned up, all guns blasting. And it's like, if your brother or your sister, sings around the house and then, all of a sudden they get up on stage and you're like, good Lord, I didn't know you could do that, that kind of thing. So there was a dichotomy of these 2 personas. I mean, as time went on, I think Elvis believed more of his own hype, if that's, kind of a way to put it. He never got to the point where you just didn't want to be around him, that kind of thing. What went on behind closed doors, I don't know. But in the general sense of everybody gathering together or whatever, he still had his little vibe, but, it wasn't anything for him, if you wanted to talk to him, for him to sit down in the floor, with the kids cross-legged and talk to them or, have breakfast with Angie, my sister, and Lisa. So there was this normalcy, just as
he was just a regular guy.
Yeah, I mean, he as regular as Elvis could be. But,
yeah, well, that's true. Yeah,
but it was this dichotomy, and I'm sure that was very hard to live with. I'm sure it's like having a split personality almost.
Now, moving into the sort of late-ish 70s, Elvis kind of made a few changes. He got rid of Red, Sonny, and Dave Hebler. Right. Mm-hmm. And I think he kind of pared back on people coming up to the house as well after about July 1976, didn't he?
Right. July 5th was that concert, or July 6th was the concert. That last concert right before Sonny and Dave and Red got dismissed. Yeah. And he even we and George Klein for a period of time, and some of the other people were just told, Elvis is making some changes. He just, wants to cut back and have some private time. And we ended up moving to California. I think it was March of 77. Last time I was actually at Graceland was fall of 76. We went up there one more time, my mom and I, and that was the last time I was ever there. And we moved to California right after the first of the year, and he died 8 months later.
Yeah, August 16th, 77. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's see.
Have you ever been to into Graceland since Elvis passed away?
Oh yeah. Yes. My dad, mom, and sister and brother, we took Tom Jones through on his tour, and that was very early on. And over the years, early on we did quite a few times, and then here lately, as we kind of all went on with our lives after that, and just it was almost like that was another lifetime. But since, we've come back into the fold, especially as my father got older, and people became familiar with who we were, because a long time people didn't even realize we existed. Because we just didn't talk about it much, we didn't, stay out there on the circuit much. And so probably I've been there at least 10 times in the last probably 3 years. But I don't know if I'll go back. I do go to the conventions in the area and the complex and everything, but they've made so many changes.
Yes, sweeping changes, yeah.
Yeah, and they don't, I hate to put it this way, but I'm not going to pay to get into a house that I lived in,
Yes,
So,
yeah, that's quite understandable.
Yeah.
Just backtracking slightly, the initial aftermath of Elvis's death must have been devastating for both, for you and for Marty and for Patsy. In fact, I remember reading in Portrait of a Friend how he actually found out. He got into the car on the 16th of August and he turned the ignition, and he just heard the announcer say, "Lee is dead, Ley."
Mm-hmm.
And basically what he'd been saying is Elvis Presley is dead, and he played one of Elvis's records, and your dad said it seemed like an eternity till the end of that record. And then he says, as you may have heard, Elvis Presley died today. And then when he got home, your mother, Patsy, was just hysterical.
Yes.
That she'd heard on the radio.
Yeah, we had, my mom and I were sitting in the living room, and my sister was in her back bedroom. We were watching something and talking, and my sister ran down the hall. She said, "They just said Elvis died, Mama." She said, "No, that's got to be, they're messing around." And she said, "No." So we waited till the commercial break, got over on our TV, and sure enough, and Mama just absolutely went to pieces. She just, she couldn't get hold of herself. And, we were all in shock, and I thought, oh my God, Daddy's driving home, because he had worked up. And I said, I'm going to go try and find Daddy, because if he's pulled over on the side of the road, or, I'm just afraid, what shape he'll be in.
Yeah.
So we walked outside, and it hadn't rained. That old song, "It Never Rains in Southern California." Well, it hadn't in a very long time. And we were standing there talking about which route I was going to take, and it started pouring down rain. And Mama went, "Oh God, Elvis is dead, and it's raining." And I don't know what that meant. It just, in her mind, it clicked, that this is odd. So anyway, I did go, and I found him. Well, he was driving. He had just turned on the main road, and we pulled over on the side of the road. And I asked him if he'd heard. And he said yes, and we just, sat there for a minute. I hugged him, and we went home, and he came home, and he locked himself in my brother's room, and I heard him in there just crying like a baby. So
the shock had finally hit him.
Yeah. And he called, and I think he talked to Billy Smith, and they were getting him a flight to go to Memphis, but my mom was in such bad shape, that he didn't want to leave her. And he said, "Look, I've left her all these years. I'm not leaving her now. Elvis is gone, and he'll understand." So he stayed with us.
There's nothing really more you can say. It was such a devastating shock to everybody. I mean, everybody knew that Elvis wasn't in good health. He'd struggled with his health, and if anybody's seen the Elvis in concert CBS television
that
special,
was a real shock for us to see that. It really was.
But even that being said, it didn't lessen the blow that everybody felt when they heard the news.
Yeah. Well, everybody, even the guys, everybody always thought, well, we're always safe. We're with Elvis, or it was like he was bulletproof and 10 feet tall, and they, now in hindsight, everybody on the inside knew, like you say, that, he had issues, and his issues were going downhill, but no one, I don't think anyone realized it was as bad as it was as early as it was.
I remember Lamar. Lamar Fike was in Portland getting ready for the tour that was supposed to start on the 17th. And Colonel Parker broke the news to Lamar, and Lamar said, "Well, you finally did it. You worked him into the ground."
Oh my God!
I know
had
Lamar
forgot
was.
about him.
Lamar was very bitter about it.
Oh, I'm sure he was. And Lamar was, you know, I actually loved Lamar to death. He was probably one of the most intelligent men I've ever met, but he was one of the most plain-spoken and hilarious men I've ever met too. And
He had a very funny way of saying things. You know, it would just make you smile or laugh.
I know, or it could cut like a knife. I mean, he would put it in such a way, it's like, man, how in the world did you work that up in your brain? You know? So,
then, so the next thing really after that was Marty and Patsy working on the book Elvis: A Portrait of a Friend.
mm-hmm.
with Leslie Smith. Now I actually have one of the original copies of this. It's quite a big, heavy, what I would call coffee table book.
Oh, you have one of the white ones, yeah.
Yeah, I have one of the white ones, and it's signed by Marty and Patsy, and I have number 526.
Oh wow, that's fairly rare.
And it's a 5,000 copies published in June 1979. So Marty must have been working on that book for probably a year, maybe 1978, and then so forth. So that's probably the initial thing he did after Elvis passed away.
Well, yes, and he had he was still in touch with Sonny and Red and stuff, and knew about their book, and then witnessed the aftermath of the book and all that stuff. And he was this Portrait of a Friend, I believe, was either the second book to come out or the third book after maybe Becky Yancey, but it may have been the second book. And
by the way, what did Marty think about the boys writing Elvis What Happened?
Well, I think he supported them because it was their life. It was, especially from somebody on the inside. I mean, that was a heinous act by Vernon. I mean, if you think about all the years and all the risks and all the blood and sweat, and of course, they did reap rewards, and then I'm sure they did show their ass at times, in certain situations, but they saved Elvis's ass. And I know for a fact, I don't know about Red, but I mean, as long as Red was with him and from the very beginning what he did, but I know for a fact that Sonny West would have seriously taken a bullet for him.
Yes.
Sonny loved him. He loved that man to maybe his own family detriment, because, I think he even went through a bit of a depression, after Elvis died, not because of the book, but because Elvis was no longer in his life, and there was no way to, after someone dies, it's over,
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But Red was with Elvis from Humes High School.
Right.
I think Sonny was probably with him from when he came out of the army in 1960. Now, right. Dave wasn't with him that long. He was sort of like 72 to 76, I think.
Right. And I mean, Dave was a nice guy. He's still a nice guy, but he didn't have the tenure that the other guys did. And I think it was mainly in a security karate instructor capacity it was, I'm sure he had a friendship with Elvis, but I mean, it wasn't like the deep-rooted family situation with Red and Sonny.
Yeah. I mean, Red and Elvis must have been just like brothers.
Well, they had to have been. I mean, the way they went through, and I guess that's why Red did what he did. But, people do make their own choices, and sometimes, people do get their own egos, and sometimes when those egos get scruffed, it's like, screw you, brother, but
yeah,
I have no doubt that they loved him dearly.
What did Marty do post Elvis, apart from obviously a portrait of a friend, and he also did a book with Alan and Nash as well, didn't he?
Yes.
And Billy Smith and Lamar.
Yes, Revelations of the Memphis Mafia.
Yeah, that's a great book.
Yeah, a lot of people, and I'm not just saying this, but a lot of people, I have like almost, well, over 7,000 people in my Facebook group, and every time they start talking, you have probably seen that they will almost call that the Elvis Bible. It's like the go-to compendium. And I think it's, I think it is. I think it's due to the fact that you've got three men that were basically with him from cradle to grave. Billy, of course, was a little bit younger than Elvis, but from Billy's, first thoughts, he was with Elvis. For his first recollections of anything, Elvis was his family, and their families were very close. And then you got Daddy to fill in the places where, Billy couldn't have been there, and Lamar was with him very early on in Germany, etc. And then at the very end, Billy and Lamar were there. So between the three of them, it's Alana used a streak of genius the way she just set it up and let each of them talk. So it's like sitting down to, a conversation of the life of Elvis Presley from beginning to end.
It is a great reference book. You can pinpoint certain points, and if there's something particularly you want to find out, you just go to that book and it'll tell you.
Yeah, and you might see them disagree sometimes on stuff or have, subtle shades of difference. But
yeah,
that's a true picture of life because, each person has their own, view on things, their own remembrances of things. But yet again, the common thread through it pretty much jives with each other, so it shows you, that they loved him and the integrity of them wanting to be truthful about his life.
So what did Marty do afterwards, after 1977?
As I said, he worked, with the Pepper Tanner. He had the A&R Music Promotions. He started the Grammy chapter in Memphis. He then, after he had his own company, which was called Mempro, that was the management and promotion, and he had one other company after that. So he continued to be in the music business and kind of segued into the advertising business right after that. So he pretty much, until he retired, was in, music and consulting in entertainment industry. They also did All the King's Men video.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Right. It was Red, Sonny, Daddy, Lamar, and Billy. So it was all five of those guys. And at that point, they decided there was such a good response to that they decided to, bring back the Memphis Mafia as an organization for a while to interact with fans and such. And after he retired, he pretty much did that, and he spent a lot of time on social media. He spent his entire
I was actually gonna come to that because he did adopt social media quite well, didn't he?
He did. That man amazed me because he was a street kid from New York, basically, and got thrown out of about as many schools as he attended. But he was a self-taught man, and he just had a brilliant way of picking things up and becoming, one of the best at them. And he did that with social media in a big way. Now, he used to take some licks, early on. There was a lot of stubborn, I shall say the word fanatic as opposed to fan, because they're two different entities, that used to, give him hell over things he would say. But he was so honest about things and so blunt speaking that he had no patience. So, for a while there, it was rough going for him, but he stayed steadfast with it. And before long, people began to realize, as time passed, more books came out, more information came out, that, Marty was telling the truth, and he loved Elvis enough to respect the truth and say the truth.
He used to have a thing on the Elvis Information Network, which was called Ask Marty, where people would send in questions and then he would answer them. So that was always a very interesting thing to read as well.
Yeah, and he enjoyed it. He loved, talking about his and their lives and Elvis, and keeping him uplifted, keeping the truth about Elvis. And he would spend hours in here in the evening. He was still a night owl. And I'd hear him in here clicking away, at his computer. And, somebody'd set him off, and I'm thinking, oh, somebody's, pulled his strings again. And then he'd walk away and cool off and come back and do it again the next day. So
I exchanged a few messages with him on Facebook from time to time. I always found him kind of straight shooting, no nonsense, just, he'd call a spade a spade.
Yeah, and he would say in very colorful language, a lot of times, just tell you exactly what he thought about something. So
that's the way to do it. That's the way to do it.
Yeah, the thing about it is, though, is most people didn't see, which a lot of people didn't know, is he inside was a very, very soft, loving man. He, if it was anything about a child or animals, he would just melt. But the thing about it is, too, he was very gruff on the outside, but if you managed to get past that exterior and he embraced you as a friend, he would die for you. He would do anything in the world for, any of those guys. To the day he died, he was, loyal. I
think, unless there's anything else you want to cover that we've missed, we've covered a lot over the last, hour and 12 minutes. It doesn't seem like an hour and 12 minutes.
No, you get me talking and I'm liable to run you into a, 3-hour session or something. So.
Well, I always love talking about Elvis. It's my favorite subject.
Yeah. Well, I wish I had, more firsthand experience for you in the early years, but I was, you absorb a lot of things as a child. Like, I can remember things. We lived at the Perugia Way house in California a couple of times, and people would say, well, on the group, they'll say, you were 3 or 5 years old. I said, listen, I was under the dining room table. I was always old for my age, and I was nosy. So, I absorbed things that people may not understand that I saw. And, I get that all the time. They'll say, well, you were 10 years old when Elvis died. No, I was 17 when Elvis died. I was a year younger than the woman he was dating at the time. So. Yeah.
Was Marty there? Sorry to cut across you. There's a little bit of delay. Was Marty there the night the Beatles came to visit Elvis?
Oh, yes. Yes, I was too.
Right. Do you remember much about that? Does Marty remember much about that?
Yeah, well, the stories you've heard about, them sitting there on the couch, and it happened exactly like that. They were all quiet, and, Elvis finally said, look, if y'all are just going to sit there and stare at me, I'm going to bed. And that kind of broke the ice, But I do remember, I can remember sitting on the couch, and mind you, I was only like, I guess it was 64, 65, which
it was August 1965.
Right. So I was 5 years old, and I can remember sitting on the couch next to my mom, and to my left on a couch that was kind of parallel to the wall. I remember it was Paul, and then I can remember what Ringo was wearing. He had on a matching like jean, Levi's jacket, the short jackets, and the pants to match. It was like white or beige. And it was John and then George, I believe. But the highlight of my night and of kind of one of my life markers is that when I got ready to go to bed, I went to shake Paul McCartney's hand. And he's left-handed, of course. I'm right-handed. And so he said, no. And for some reason, he called me Shishi. I don't know why. But he said, no, Shishi, this is how you do it. And he explained to me about shaking hands with a left-handed person versus a right-handed person and all that. And so, I mean, I can remember that like it was yesterday. And so for the rest of my life, I've loved Paul McCartney since that
Wow,
time.
that's some memory, isn't it?
It is. I mean, and again, that memory coupled with the Elvis whole thing, because we never realized, what was going on as far as we knew he was famous. I can remember going to the movies and people just almost crushing me against the car, or, people, we'd go up to the Elvis gate and, you see all these strange faces peering in the windows of your car, at night. And I'm like, this is not normal, but it became normal.
Yeah, it
But,
became normal for Elvis, yeah.
yeah. And then so in hindsight, like I said, we all went on with our lives and did our own careers and whatever. And just since I've kind of taken this over, since Daddy passed, that's kind of why I started doing it. Is he dedicated too much to it to just let it be abandoned. And so, I took up the mantle of the Memphis Mafia, and that's what we're trying to do now. But now that I see and talk to people, I'm like, I have nothing to compare this to, because there are no, even with the Beatles or Marilyn Monroe or anybody, there is no one else to compare what Elvis did or accomplished or was or is. And so it's hard for us to wrap our minds around the fact that we were on the inside of that. We were on the inner circle of that. And it's just enormous. It's mind-boggling to try to compare that to what people must feel. Because
I always say, as much as I know about Elvis, I think I know about Elvis's life and career, I can only ever say from what I see from the outside, but you're telling me from the inside.
Right. And so I'll often say to people like you or whoever, I'm like, what drew you to him? I've seen snippets of it like we discussed earlier, and, and then looking at him one day at the pool, I thought, good Lord, this man is gorgeous. So, it finally dawned on me, what all the women were going crazy about. But I'll often ask people that weren't on the inside, what is it? What is it about Elvis Presley that causes this loyal fervor, for so many years afterwards? And it's hard for people to explain their.
It is, yes. It still is very, very difficult to explain, to put your finger on it.
Yeah, it is. And especially in hindsight, because at the time, I think what it was is, it was groundbreaking. But we have all these new generations coming up that still find him fascinating. So, that's one of the reasons that I still do it, is to keep the truth and integrity, because there's a lot of people that may have spent 1 minute with him, or, may have had a date with him one night or 3 nights, and they come out, instead of just sharing their unique story, they act like, they are the expert, and they will, sometimes negate what other people that were with him a whole lot longer and meant a whole lot more to him have said. So, that truth and integrity is very important and paramount for history.
So would you like to share with everybody now what you're doing in the Elvis world these days?
These days, my sister and I, because my brother is a very private person, he's got a family that he's raising, and he basically has a job that takes a lot of his time. So it's me and my sister Angie, and we usually try during birthday week in Elvis and the Elvis week during August to get out, meet fans. We are trying to keep the legacy of the Memphis Mafia going as well, always with the truth and integrity of what really happened with Elvis and them, by, talking to people, trying to keep their memory alive. We have started a line of merchandise for the Memphis Mafia, and make those items like T-shirts and jackets and, the regular merch, as they say nowadays. That way, it keeps the memory alive, and it keeps going and going and going. But we're trying to expand it into, I do own the trademark now for Memphis Mafia. So we're going to try and do a lot more projects, maybe even a book, and maybe more audio visual programs like DVDs and such, so that we can, for the next generations, keep it alive for them and keep them, informed of what Elvis did and accomplished.
And how can people reach you? You do have a Facebook group, I believe.
Yes, we do. It's the official Memphis Mafia group. It's real simple, and it's on Facebook. Just look up official Memphis Mafia, and just, if you want to join, just apply there with the little button. And if you want to order merchandise, you can, or talk to me, you can email me at Sheri, S-H-E, D as in David, D as in David, I, the number 2, at yahoo.com. And just put in the subject line Memphis Mafia, and I'll be sure and pick it out that way. It's easier for me to spot. And, we'll be glad to talk to you, or, show you our merchandise, or give you the calendar of, where we might be. And we love talking to people and seeing people.
Great. I'm just looking here now while you were saying that. I've come across something which I'd like to share with everybody. It's what Marty said about Elvis, and I'd like to close with it because I think it's quite poignant. Now, it's obvious they loved each other very, very much. Elvis thought a lot of Marty, or he wouldn't have asked him to be his best man at the wedding. So that to me is self-explanatory. But I just found this, and basically what Marty says was, my favorite memory of Elvis is when I went up to Graceland in 1971. I walked in the kitchen one day, and he was leaning against the cabinet, and he smiled when he saw me. So that's the thing that's the thing that he remembers most about Elvis. And he also finishes by saying, the best thing he ever gave me was his close friendship and his smile. Yeah,
he loved him. I'm about to get a little emotional myself.
Yeah, well, I must admit now, reading that, I had a little bit of a lump in my throat as well. So
yeah,
just thinking about them both.
I know, and as I said earlier, that is a testimony to both Elvis and my father, because, as I said, not many people knew that side of my father, but my father was a very loving, very loyal man, and he loved Elvis Presley till the day he died.
Elvis Presley shared the same attributes that your dad did. That's what I think. They were very much alike.
Yeah, it's like no nonsense. If I want something done, I want it done. If you're going to do it right. If you can't, say you can't do it and let somebody else do it.
Take care of business in a flash.
Exactly. There you go, Steve. So,
Sheri, I'd like to thank you very much for sharing all these reminiscences with and all this information with myself and our listeners. And if you ever want to come back on again, you'll be most welcome.
Oh, well, Steve, thank you so much. And thank you for the honor of choosing to talk with me and being interested in what we do have to say, because it's a labor of love for us now.
Yeah, and so is this. My YouTube channel, my podcast channel, it's all done just for the love of Elvis.
Yeah, and it keeps growing. And so hopefully we're doing our job correctly if it keeps going.
True. Very true. Thank you once again.
Thank you, Steve. Have a blessed day.